I don't think that I would call it a whirlwind in terms of our relationship. Obviously, there have been layers attached to how public it has become after we had a good 5-6 months almost with just privacy, which was amazing. But no, I think we were able to really have so much time just to connect, and we never went longer than 2 weeks without seeing each other, even though we were obviously doing a long-distance relationship, so.
They tried to bury this. For years, the royal family stayed silent while the rumors spread, the questions mounted, and the public demanded answers. But you cannot hide the truth forever. A DNA test has been carried out. The results are in. And what they reveal about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's children is so explosive, so absolutely jaw-dropping, that even the palace cannot spin its way out of this one. Everything is about to change. The secret they fought so hard to protect is finally out.
There is a way of doing things, but for us, for this union and the specifics around her race, there was an opportunity, many opportunities, for my family to show some public support.
Are you ready for the truth? Because there is no going back after this. For several years now, claims have circulated online and in certain media circles suggesting that Meghan did not physically carry her children, and that both Archie and their daughter Lilibet Diana were born through surrogacy. These claims have never been proven. No medical evidence has been presented. Official accounts have consistently stated that Meghan gave birth to both children. And yet, the conversation has never fully gone away. To understand why, you have to look at how it all started, and more importantly, what actually fueled it. The first signs of public suspicion appeared in the weeks leading up to Archie's birth in May 2019. At that point, the discussion was relatively small and confined mostly to royal watching blogs, online forums, and a handful of social media accounts that closely tracked the movements of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It was not mainstream, it was not being reported in major newspapers. It was, for the most part, background noise, but background noise has a way of getting louder. When Archie was born on the 6th of May 2019 at the Portland Hospital in London, the couple made a deliberate choice that broke with a well-established royal tradition. For decades, the public had come to expect a very specific ritual following a royal birth. The mother and father would appear on the steps of the hospital, baby in arms, within hours of delivery. Princess Diana did it. Sarah. Ferguson did it. Kate Middleton did it 3 times, each time standing outside the Lindo Wing at St. Mary's Hospital while cameras from around the world captured the moment. It had become one of those defining images of modern royal life. Harry and Meghan chose not to do that. They said they wanted privacy and that they had decided in advance to handle the birth differently. That was entirely within their rights. But for a section of the public that had grown accustomed to that level of visibility, the decision felt unusual. Critics latched onto it almost immediately, and the refusal to pose outside the hospital became, in their view, the first reason to ask questions. Then came the issue of the birth announcement timing. Buckingham Palace had initially informed the press that Meghan had gone into labour. It was later revealed that Archie had in fact already been born before that announcement was made. For supporters of the couple, this was a straightforward and understandable effort to manage media pressure and protect a private moment. For skeptics, it looked like information was being released that did not line up with reality, and that inconsistency, however minor, gave people something to point to. The location of the birth also attracted attention. It was confirmed that Archie was born at the private Portland Hospital, but specific details were kept tightly under wraps. There were no public statements from the attending medical staff of the kind that royal watchers had sometimes seen following earlier births. The combination of limited information, a break from tradition, and the timing confusion created, as one commentator put it, room for doubt where doubt might otherwise not have existed. Around the same time, people online began going back through photographs and video footage of Meghan during her pregnancy. This is where the speculation started to take on a life of its own. Some users claimed that her baby bump appeared to change shape or size between different public appearances. Others said it looked unusually positioned at certain angles. From these observations, a term began to spread across social media and conspiracy-focused websites: moon bump. This was the phrase used by those promoting the theory that Meghan had been wearing a prosthetic pregnancy belly. There was no supporting evidence put forward for this claim. It was based entirely on visual interpretation of photographs and videos, which can be affected by lighting, clothing, and camera angles, among many other factors. Despite this, the theory was shared widely and repeatedly across platforms. As the weeks passed, the conversation became more organized and more vocal. One of the most prominent public figures to raise questions was Lady Colin Campbell, a royal author and commentator based in Britain. She repeatedly questioned what she described as a lack of clarity around the circumstances of the birth, and argued publicly that there should be more transparency. She also raised the point that under historical royal succession traditions, heirs were expected to be born of the body, suggesting that if surrogacy had taken place, it could raise questions about the children's position in the line of succession. Her comments were shared and debated across British and American media, and they gave the conspiracy a more public-facing voice than it had previously had. Family dynamics then brought a more personal dimension to the story. Samantha Markle, Meghan's half-sister, gave a number of interviews in which she said she believed surrogacy was possible. She referenced conversations she claimed her father, Thomas Markle, had described to her, involving Meghan having frozen her eggs years before Archie's birth, and suggested this could point to the use of a surrogate. Samantha offered no medical evidence to back up these claims, but because they came from a family member, they carried a different kind of weight in media coverage. Tabloids in both the UK and the United States picked up her statements, and they reached audiences who had not previously been following the speculation online. Through the latter part of 2019 and into 2020, social media became the primary engine driving the narrative forward. Entire accounts were set up with the specific purpose of analysing Meghan's pregnancy photographs and video clips frame by frame. Users claimed certain videos showed the bump behaving in ways that seemed physically inconsistent. Others pointed to what they described as unusually flexible movement for someone in late pregnancy. These observations were presented as proof, but they were not. They were interpretations, and in many cases, they were made by people with no medical background whatsoever. The claims spread not because they were verified, but because they were repeated often enough that they began to feel, to some, like established fact. When Harry and Meghan announced in early 2020 that they were stepping back from their roles as senior members of the royal family, a move widely referred to in the press as Megxit, the atmosphere of distrust among certain audiences intensified further. To those who already believed the couple had violated royal norms, relocating to North America looked like a further attempt to distance themselves from scrutiny. The couple eventually settled in California, and it was there that their daughter Lilibet Diana was born in June 2021 at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. The birth of Lilibet reignited the entire debate. It took place outside the British royal system, far from the traditional settings and reporting structures that people were used to. Even less public information was released compared to Archie's birth. Some commentators at the time openly called for Harry to provide proof of paternity, including through DNA testing, though these calls came not from any official or legal authority, but from media personalities and online figures. When Harry's memoir, Spare, was published, in January 2023, some readers focused heavily on his descriptions of both births, looking for details that either supported or contradicted the surrogacy claims. It is worth being clear about where things stand. As of today, no verified evidence has ever been produced to support the claim that Meghan Markle used a surrogate for either pregnancy. Official records and all public accounts state that she gave birth to both Archie and Lilibet. Fact-checking organisations have looked into specific claims, including a supposed social media post from Kensington Palace referencing a surrogate birth, and found it to be fabricated. The rumours have persisted not because of evidence, but because of a combination of broken tradition, limited transparency, organised online activity, and commentary from public figures who amplified speculation without providing proof. What began as a small discussion on niche forums in 2019 grew over several years into one of the most enduring controversies surrounding the couple. And more recently, reports have emerged suggesting that Prince William ordered a DNA test in connection with questions about the children's parentage, a claim that has not been officially confirmed by the palace or by William himself. Whether true or not, the fact that such reports are now circulating shows just how far this conversation has travelled and how much it continues to capture public attention. The question of what triggered it, who drove it, and what the facts actually show remains as relevant today as it was when the first rumours began to surface 6 years ago. To understand why the surrogacy rumours surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry generated such intense public reaction, you have to understand something about the British monarchy that goes far deeper than modern celebrity culture. The question of who a royal child's parents are has never been a trivial matter in Britain. For centuries, it has been directly tied to questions of power, inheritance, and political stability. Paternity in the context of the royal family is not simply a personal issue, it is a constitutional one. The entire structure of royal succession is built on the idea of legitimate descent. A child's right to inherit the throne, to hold a royal title, and to take their place in the line of succession has historically depended on whether they were born within a legally recognized marriage and whether their parentage could be clearly established. This was not always about sentiment or family values, it was about preventing disputes over who had the right to rule. Uncertain lines of descent caused wars, they toppled dynasties, they destabilized entire nations. The British royal family learned through centuries of difficult experience that clarity around birth and parentage was not optional. It was essential. The legal framework that governed royal marriages for a long period of British history was the Royal Marriages Act of 1772. This piece of legislation required members of the royal family to obtain the approval of the reigning monarch before entering into a marriage. If that approval was not given, the marriage could be declared void, meaning it had no legal standing. And if the marriage had no legal standing, any children born from it were considered illegitimate. Illegitimate children, under that framework, could not inherit the throne, regardless of their biological connection to a royal parent. The law was specifically designed to protect the integrity of the succession and to prevent situations where competing claims to the throne could arise from marriages that had not been formally sanctioned. That particular act was eventually replaced by the Succession to the Crown Act in 2013, which relaxed some of the older requirements around marriage approval. Under the updated legislation, members of the royal family no longer need the monarch's consent unless they are within the first 6 in line to the throne. The rules were modernised, and the principle that sons and daughters have equal rights to succeed was also introduced at the same time, ending the previous system where male heirs took precedence over female ones regardless of birth order. But while the specific rules changed, the underlying principle remained the same. Succession is based on recognised legitimate descent. The identity and legal status of a royal child's parents still matters. This is the context in which questions about surrogacy become particularly complicated. Surrogacy, as a method of reproduction, is not in itself a form of deception. It does not automatically mean that the people raising a child are not the biological parents. In many cases of surrogacy, the child is biologically connected to both intended parents through IVF, with the surrogate simply carrying the pregnancy. The child's DNA can still trace directly back to the couple who commissioned the birth. So in terms of biological lineage, the connection can be entirely genuine. However, surrogacy does raise questions about how the birth took place, how openly that information is shared, and whether the method fits within the expectations and traditions of an institution as historically rigid as the British monarchy. There is no recorded precedent in British royal history of a senior member of the family having used a surrogate in a way that affected the line of succession. This is not simply a modern oversight. Surrogacy as a widely practiced and legally recognised arrangement is a relatively recent development, and the royal family's history predates it by many centuries. What history does show, very clearly, is that the question of whether a child was legitimately born was taken with the utmost seriousness across every era of British royal rule. The historical record is full of examples that illustrate just how consequential these questions were. King Henry I, who ruled England from 1100 to 1135, is believed to have fathered approximately 25 children outside of his marriage. Some of these children were publicly acknowledged and given positions of influence, but none of them were permitted to inherit the throne because none of them were legitimate heirs in the eyes of the law. Their existence was known. Their connection to the king was not seriously disputed, but their status as illegitimate children placed them entirely outside the line of succession. Several centuries later, King Charles II, who ruled from 1660 to 1685, had at least 14 children with various mistresses. He openly acknowledged several of them and granted them titles and lands, yet none of them were eligible to succeed him because none were born within a lawful marriage. When Charles II died without a legitimate heir, the throne passed to his brother, James II, rather than to any of the many children he had fathered outside of wedlock. The personal relationships were well known. The political consequences of illegitimacy were absolute. King William, IV, who ruled from 1830 to 1837, had 10 children with his long-term companion, the actress Dorothea Jordan, before he eventually married Princess Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen. His children with Jordan were socially recognized and several of them held titles, but they were not in the line of succession. When William IV died without a legitimate heir from his marriage to Adelaide, the throne passed to his niece Victoria, rather than to any of his 10 surviving children with Jordan. The pattern is consistent across centuries. Biological connection alone was never sufficient. Legitimacy, in the legal and institutional sense, was what determined succession. There are also examples involving marriages that were entered into without the required royal approval. Prince Augustus Frederick, the Duke of Sussex, who was the 6th son of King George III, married Lady Augusta Murray in 1793 without obtaining his father's consent, as was required under the Royal Marriages Act at the time. The marriage was subsequently declared void, and their children were considered illegitimate under the law. This was not a matter of personal judgment or social disapproval. It was a legal outcome with direct consequences for the children's status and their place, or rather their absence, from the royal succession. These historical cases do not involve anything like modern surrogacy, and they are not about paternity fraud in the contemporary sense of someone deliberately misrepresenting who a child's biological father is. But they illustrate very clearly the principle that has governed royal succession for hundreds of years. Unclear or disputed lines of descent were treated as threats to stability, and the institutions around the monarchy consistently moved to enforce strict boundaries around birth, legitimacy, and lineage. In the modern era, paternity testing has introduced a scientific dimension to questions that previously could only be addressed through circumstantial evidence or social convention. DNA testing is now straightforward, reliable, and widely available. What might have been a matter of rumor and social judgment in previous centuries can today be resolved, at least biologically, with a relatively simple test. This has changed the nature of public debate around royal parentage, even if it has not changed the underlying legal framework. People now ask questions about biological descent with an expectation that concrete answers are possible, and that expectation applies to the royal family just as it does to anyone else. In the specific case of Harry and Meghan, the surrogacy claims that emerged following Archie's birth in 2019 and Lilibet's birth in 2021 prompted a subset of commentators to raise the question of whether the children's position in the line of succession could be affected. These arguments were largely made by media figures and online commentators rather than legal experts or official institutions, but they reflected a genuine, if often poorly informed, awareness of how succession rules work. At the time of Archie's birth, he was 7th in line to the throne. By the time Lilibet was born, the couple had already stepped back from senior royal duties, and both children's positions in the line of succession had shifted. But they remained part of the official succession, and their status has not been formally challenged through any legal process. Official sources, including Buckingham Palace, have not given any credence to the surrogacy claims. Independent fact-checkers have examined specific allegations, including fabricated social media posts purporting to come from Kensington Palace, and found them to be false. The mainstream medical and legal communities have not engaged with these theories as serious propositions. Nevertheless, the broader conversation about what surrogacy would mean for a royal family, steeped in centuries of succession law, is one that reasonable people can examine seriously, even if the specific claims about Harry and Meghan remain unsubstantiated. What the history of the British monarchy makes clear is that the rules around legitimate descent were never designed to be cruel or arbitrary. They existed because the alternative, a succession system with no clear criteria, created instability that had real and sometimes violent consequences. The modernization of those rules over time, including the changes introduced in 2013, reflects a recognition that the world has changed and that the monarchy must adapt. But the core principle, that the identity and legitimacy of a royal child's parentage matters, has not disappeared. It has simply evolved. And in that context, it is not difficult to understand why questions around birth, surrogacy, and parentage continue to attract such strong reactions when they are raised in connection with one of the most scrutinized families in the world. Every major controversy has two sides to it. There is the claim itself, and then there is what the available evidence actually shows. In the case of the surrogacy rumors surrounding Meghan Markle, the claims have been covered extensively, repeated across social media platforms, amplified by certain public figures, and debated in comment sections and tabloid columns for the better part of 6 years. What has received considerably less attention in many of the spaces where this conversation takes place is the factual record. The documented accounts, the first-hand testimony, and the identifiable origins of the rumor itself tell a story that looks quite different from the one the conspiracy theorists have been promoting. To start at the beginning, when Meghan's first pregnancy was announced in October 2018, the news was shared privately with members of the royal family at the wedding of Princess Eugenie. Prince Harry later confirmed this detail in his memoir, Spare, published in January 2023. He described how he and Meghan chose that occasion to tell their relatives in person before any public announcement was made. This is a significant detail because it establishes that the pregnancy was known within the royal family months before Archie's birth, and that it was communicated in the way a genuine pregnancy would be, quietly and personally, rather than introduced suddenly or without prior context. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was born on the 6th of May 2019 at the Portland Hospital in London. Shortly after the birth, Harry gave a brief television statement in which he described the experience as amazing and said he was incredibly proud of his wife. 2 days later, the couple introduced Archie publicly at Windsor Castle, having chosen not to follow the traditional hospital steps, photo call. That decision, as discussed earlier, became one of the primary sparks for public suspicion. But choosing to handle the media presentation of your newborn differently from your predecessors is not evidence of anything other than a preference for privacy. It is worth keeping that distinction clearly in mind. The most detailed and compelling account of Archie's birth comes from Harry's own memoir. In Spare, he described the labour in specific first-hand terms that are difficult to square with the idea that Meghan was not physically present and giving birth. He wrote about the process of labour progressing through the night, about Meghan using an exercise ball for pain relief, and about doctors eventually administering an epidural. He described the room, the medical staff, and the atmosphere in the way someone writes when they are recalling a direct personal experience rather than constructing a narrative. He even mentioned accidentally inhaling some of the nitrous oxide that had been provided for Meghan, an admission that is both embarrassingly specific and entirely consistent with the kind of unguarded detail that tends to appear in genuine recollections, rather than carefully scripted ones. When the baby arrived, Harry wrote that a nurse placed Archie on Meghan's chest immediately after the birth, and that both of them cried. These are not the kinds of details that someone invents to cover up a surrogacy arrangement. They are the kinds of details that a person remembers because they were present and because the moment was real. The specificity of the account, the mundane physical details alongside the emotional ones, reads far more like an unfiltered birth story than a performance designed to mislead. The same pattern holds for the birth of their daughter Lilibet Diana in June 2021 at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital in California. Harry described being present in the delivery room and standing beside the doctor as the baby was born. He recalled a tense moment when Lilibet did not cry immediately after birth, and the relief he felt when she finally did. Again, these are highly specific first-hand observations from someone positioned physically in the room. The fact that two separate birth accounts, written years apart and relating to two different children, both contain this level of personal and medical detail, makes it considerably harder to argue that neither birth actually took place. Meghan herself has spoken openly about the physical realities of pregnancy on more than one occasion. She has mentioned gaining a significant amount of weight during each pregnancy and described the physical and emotional challenges of being pregnant while living under intense public scrutiny. These are not the kinds of admissions someone makes if they are trying to maintain the fiction of a pregnancy they did not experience. Talking candidly about weight gain, bodily changes, and the strain of public life while expecting involves a degree of personal disclosure that would be both unnecessary and counterproductive if the goal were to keep surrogacy hidden. With the factual record in mind, it becomes important to look at where the rumors actually came from, because understanding the source of a claim is essential to evaluating its credibility. The surrogacy conspiracy did not originate with medical professionals, legal experts, or investigative journalists who had uncovered new information. It originated primarily within a specific online community that was, from the outset, hostile to Meghan Markle. Among the figures most closely associated with the early spread of these claims are individuals known online as Sadie Quinlan and Keziah Connolly, the latter of whom operated under the nickname Murky Meg, along with a person named Natasha Cannell. These individuals were active members of a private group on the social media platform MeWe, where they shared and promoted conspiracy theories about Meghan's pregnancies. From there, the content spread outward to Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and other platforms, reaching audiences far beyond the original group. Doctored images were circulated. Claims that Meghan's baby bump was prosthetic were repeated until they became familiar enough to feel, to some, like they carried weight. This is how misinformation spreads, not through verification, but through volume and repetition. Closely tied to this online campaign was Samantha Markle, Meghan's half-sister, who gave a number of interviews over several years in which she repeatedly cast doubt on the circumstances of both pregnancies. Samantha claimed that her father, Thomas Markle, had told her that Meghan had collected her frozen eggs at some point before Archie's birth and suggested this could indicate that a surrogate had been used. She raised questions about why the couple had presented the birth the way they did, weaving these personal observations into the broader framework of surrogacy claims that was already circulating online. Samantha did not present any medical records, statements from healthcare professionals, or any other form of verifiable evidence. Nevertheless, her comments attracted significant media coverage in both the UK and the United States, partly because of her family, connection to Meghan, and partly because the claims fitted neatly into an existing narrative that certain outlets were already promoting. She has gone further still, publicly stating that she believes Archie and Lilibet should be removed from the line of succession on the basis that they were born through surrogacy, a direct and serious allegation made entirely without credible supporting evidence. Lady Colin Campbell, a British royal author and commentator who has made a career of voicing controversial opinions about the royal family, has also been a consistent presence in this conversation. Campbell has not presented medical evidence of any kind, but she has repeatedly called for what she describes as greater transparency around the births of both children and has made public statements suggesting, without substantiation, that the situation surrounding the births raises unanswered questions. Her framing has been picked up by certain media outlets as representing a credible voice of skepticism, even though her position amounts to amplifying speculation rather than presenting facts. The suggestion that something must be wrong because not everything has been made public is not evidence of wrongdoing. It is simply an invitation to distrust. In the United States, the television presenter Megyn Kelly also contributed to the atmosphere in which these rumors continue to circulate and gain oxygen. Kelly stopped short of explicitly claiming that Meghan used a surrogate, but she publicly criticized a video of Meghan in a hospital room shortly before Lilibet's birth, in which Meghan was seen dancing. Kelly described the video as bizarre and uncomfortable, and said directly that it recalled conspiracy theories, suggesting Meghan might not have physically carried her babies. Comments of this kind, made to a large audience, do not need to make a definitive claim in order to be damaging. By linking the video to existing conspiracy theories and framing it as something that warranted suspicion, Kelly provided those theories with a level of mainstream visibility they would not otherwise have had. It is worth noting that none of the individuals most associated with promoting or amplifying these claims, whether Quinlan, Connolly, Samantha Markle, Thomas Markle, Lady Colin Campbell, or Megyn Kelly, have ever produced a single piece of medically verifiable evidence to support the surrogacy allegations. Not one medical record, not one statement from a healthcare professional, not one document of any kind. The entire edifice of the conspiracy rests on visual interpretation of photographs, circumstantial observations about behavior and presentation, and commentary from people who were, in most cases, already openly critical of Meghan before the surrogacy claims ever began to circulate. This matters because the credibility of any claim is inseparable from the credibility of its source and the nature of its evidence. When the people making a claim have a demonstrable personal or professional interest in the subject being discussed in a negative light, and when the claim itself rests on no verifiable foundation, the appropriate response is not to treat it as an open question requiring further investigation. It is to recognize it for what it is. The documented facts point in one clear direction. Harry's detailed first-hand accounts of both births, Meghan's own candid discussions of pregnancy, the confirmed hospital locations, the timeline of the pregnancy announcements, and the complete absence of any medical or legal challenge from any credible institution all point to the same conclusion. The surrogacy claims are not a mystery waiting to be solved. They are a rumour that grew out of online hostility, was amplified by estranged family members and controversial commentators, and has persisted not because of evidence, but because of the reach and repetition of those who chose to spread it. There is a particular kind of cruelty in having your identity questioned publicly. It is one thing to face criticism for decisions you have made or words you have said. It's another thing entirely to have the circumstances of your own birth turned into a subject of public debate, your physical appearance picked apart by strangers, and your biological connection to your own parents treated as a matter of open speculation. Prince Harry has lived with exactly that kind of scrutiny for much of his adult life, and the rumours surrounding his paternity represent one of the more persistent and unfounded claims that has followed him across decades. To understand where these rumours came from, you have to understand the context in which they developed. Princess Diana's marriage to Prince Charles was, by the accounts of both parties and by the evidence of multiple biographers, deeply unhappy for much of its duration. The couple married in July 1981, and by their own later admissions, the relationship had serious difficulties, almost from the beginning. Diana was young, relatively inexperienced in royal life, and found herself navigating an institution that offered very little in the way of emotional support. Charles, for his part, had never fully moved on from his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, something that both he and Diana eventually confirmed publicly. The marriage produced two sons, Prince William, born in June 1982, and Prince Harry, born in September 1984. It ended in divorce in 1996, and Diana died in Paris in August 1997. During the years of her marriage and in the period that followed her separation from Charles, Diana formed a number of close personal connections with men outside her marriage. These relationships were scrutinized intensely by the media and the public, and several of them became the subject of significant press coverage. It is from this broader context that the questions about Harry's paternity eventually emerged, though the specific claim centers on one name more than any other. The first relationship that attracted public attention was Diana's close friendship with Barry Manakee, a police officer who served as her personal protection officer in the early part of the 1980s. Manakee was not a tutor or advisor. His role was specifically to provide security for Diana, but the two developed a close personal bond during that time. Friends and biographers who later wrote about Diana describe Manakee as someone she confided in during a period of considerable personal unhappiness, and characterized him as an emotional refuge during the early and difficult years of her marriage. There is no credible evidence that the relationship was physical rather than emotional, but the closeness between them was enough to attract attention, and Manakee was eventually reassigned by the royal household amid concerns about the nature of the bond. His reassignment and the fact that he died in a motorcycle accident in 1987 only intensified public fascination with the story of their friendship. Later, Diana was reported to have a close friendship with Oliver Hoare, an art dealer, during the late 1980s and into the 1990s. Their relationship was described by people close to Diana as one of companionship and understanding, a connection that offered her something her marriage could not provide. There were suggestions of a deeper intimacy, but no verified proof of a physical affair has ever been established. What is documented is that Diana found in Hoare someone she trusted and someone who listened to her, and that the friendship, whatever its precise nature, was meaningful to her during a very difficult period of her life. Then there was Dr. Hasnat Khan, a Pakistani heart surgeon whom Diana reportedly met in 1995. This relationship was more private than some of her others, but it was acknowledged by Diana's friends and confirmed by various biographers. Diana was said to have been genuinely and deeply in love with Khan, and by multiple accounts the relationship was one of the most serious emotional connections of her later life. Khan himself has spoken on occasion about the relationship in the years since Diana's death, confirming that it was real and significant. This particular relationship, however, has no bearing whatsoever on questions about Harry's paternity, given that it developed nearly a decade after Harry was born. The name that sits at the centre of the paternity rumours is James Hewitt, a British Army officer who served in the Household Cavalry. Hewitt and Diana met in the mid-1980s, and what began as a friendship developed into a romantic affair that lasted for several years. Unlike some of Diana's other relationships, the affair with Hewitt became publicly confirmed. Hewitt himself gave interviews in which he spoke about the relationship, and it became one of the most discussed aspects of Diana's private life. It is largely because of this affair and because of certain perceived physical similarities, most notably Harry's red hair, that the paternity rumours took hold and continued to circulate. The argument made by those promoting the theory is essentially this: Diana had an affair with Hewitt, Harry has red hair and does not strongly resemble Prince Charles in certain respects, therefore Hewitt could be Harry's biological father. On the surface, to someone who has not looked at the timeline carefully, the argument might seem worth examining. When you do look at the timeline, however, the claim falls apart immediately and completely. Prince Harry was born on the 15th of September, 1984. The affair between Princess Diana and James Hewitt, according to all credible accounts, including those of Hewitt himself, did not begin until 1986. That is at minimum a full year after Harry's birth. Even if one were to suppose that Diana and Hewitt had some contact prior to the publicly documented start of their relationship, the most generous possible reading of the timeline still places Harry's conception well before any romantic or physical relationship between the two could have begun. Hewitt has himself stated clearly and on multiple occasions that he is not Harry's father, and that the relationship with Diana did not begin until after Harry was already born. This is not a matter of competing interpretations. The chronology makes the claim impossible. The red hair argument, which has been used repeatedly to suggest a physical resemblance between Harry and Hewitt, also does not hold up to scrutiny once you examine the genetics of Diana's family. The Spencer family, from which Diana came, carried the gene for red hair. Diana herself had naturally auburn tones in her hair, something visible in photographs from her younger years before her hair was frequently lightened for public appearances. Other members of the Spencer family also exhibited red or reddish hair. Harry's colouring is entirely consistent with what you would expect from someone who inherited the Spencer family genetics. Hair colour, like many physical traits, is determined by multiple genes and can vary considerably between children and their parents and between siblings. The fact that Harry looks different from Charles in some respects is not evidence of alternative paternity. It is simply the normal variation that exists within any family. The persistence of the Hewitt rumour in public conversation says more about the public's enduring fascination with Diana and the ongoing interest in the lives of the royal family than it does about any factual basis for the claim. Diana was one of the most famous and beloved figures of the 20th century, and her death at the age of 36, in circumstances that themselves attracted enormous speculation, ensured that public interest in her life and relationships would never fully subside. The rumours about Harry's paternity are, in many ways, an extension of that fascination, a story that people have returned to repeatedly, not because new evidence has emerged, but because the questions feel compelling in the context of Diana's complicated and well-documented personal life. It is in this context that Prince Harry has drawn a parallel between the scrutiny his wife Meghan has faced and the scrutiny his mother Diana endured. The comparison is one he has made in various interviews and public statements, and it is not difficult to see why he makes it. Both women found themselves at the centre of narratives they did not create and could not control. Both faced claims that touched on the most intimate aspects of their lives and their families. Both were subjected to sustained public speculation that was driven not by evidence, but by a combination of media interest, personal hostility from certain quarters, and the extraordinary level of attention that comes with being connected to the British royal family. In Diana's case, the accusations and speculation focused on her relationships and, by extension, on whether Charles was truly Harry's biological father. The rumours caused real pain within the family and contributed to a public atmosphere in which Diana's character and conduct were constantly being evaluated and judged. In Meghan's case, the accusations have centred on whether she physically carried her own children. A different kind of claim, but one that is similarly intimate, similarly unfounded, and similarly resistant to correction, because it operates in a space where absence of evidence is treated as evidence of absence of truth. Harry has spoken about his belief that the lack of support Meghan received from within the royal institution mirrored, in some respects, the isolation his mother experienced. Whether one agrees with that assessment or not, the emotional logic behind it is understandable. He watched his mother be scrutinised, misrepresented, and ultimately failed by the systems and people around her. He then watched his wife face a different but structurally similar pattern of public attack and felt, by his own account, that history was in some way repeating itself. What both stories share, ultimately, is the same fundamental problem. Rumors about the most personal aspects of a person's life, their body, their children, their identity, can cause lasting damage even when they are entirely without foundation. They do not require evidence to spread. They do not require verification to be believed by some. And they do not go away simply because they have been shown to be false. The claims about Harry's paternity have been debunked by the timeline and by genetics. The claims about Meghan's pregnancies have been contradicted by first-hand testimony, documented hospital records, and the complete absence of any credible counter-evidence. And yet both sets of rumors persist, circulating in the same online spaces and tabloid columns that gave them life in the first place. That persistence is perhaps the most revealing thing about the entire story. It tells us less about Harry and Meghan, or about Diana and Charles, than it does about the nature of public fascination with the royal family, and about the way in which rumour, once established, develops a momentum of its own that facts alone are rarely sufficient to stop.